Hey guys, tonight we're clocking in for the most exhausting shift history has to offer. A full workday in Victorian times. Not Downton Abbey, not top hats, tea, and tasteful misery. I mean real, grimy, unpaid overtime Victorian work. The kind that stains your soul and your laundry, and where your benefits package is just surviving. So before you settle in, take a moment to like and subscribe. But only if you actually enjoy what I do here. Leave a comment telling me where you are listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, switch on a fan for that white noise, and get as comfortable as possible. But let's pause for a second. Have you ever wondered what it was like to work in a Victorian factory, where a break meant not passing out in the spinning frame? Did children actually work 14-hour shifts? Or is that just an HR compliance nightmare? Why does every Victorian photo look like someone just found out about taxes for the first time? Could you actually survive a day as a chimney sweep? Or would you get stuck and have to be extracted like a Victorian spaghetti noodle? What did lunch look like for someone earning sixpence a week? Did anyone ever get seconds, or just more coal dust? Is your manager a stern old man with a handlebar mustache, or is it a rat with a tiny top hat? And did anyone, at any point, figure out what industrial safety means, or was it just code for don't lose all your fingers before Christmas? Congratulations, you've just woken up in London, 1851, at the height of the Industrial Revolution. You have 10 shillings to your name, half a sandwich in your pocket, and a cough that sounds suspiciously permanent. Good luck. You open your eyes to the soothing sound of 20 people snoring in a single room, interspersed with the dulcet notes of someone coughing up the Industrial Revolution. The air is thick with coal dust and regret. Your bed is a sagging straw mattress you share with at least 3 other people, and at least 12 more you can't see, but can definitely feel crawling up your leg. You'd like to stretch, but there's an elbow in your ear, and someone's foot dangerously close to your nose. On a good day, you wake up before someone else's morning breath has a chance to invade your dreams. On a bad day, you wake up to the sensation of a flea circus taking its morning parade up your shin. There's a distant hope you'll roll out of bed onto something soft. But statistically, it's more likely to be a cold wooden floor. Or, if your luck is truly Victorian, a strategically placed chamber pot. The first light of morning slips through a grimy window, illuminating clouds of dust motes and the dense, swirling fog that is equal parts London air pollution and the ghost of last night's dinner. You inhale deeply by accident and immediately regret it, coughing so hard you wake your nearest bunkmate. They respond by pulling the blanket tighter, which is impressive since the blanket is technically just a worn-out coat that's seen more winters than the building itself. You try to sit up, but the mattress is so uneven you're forced to perform a low-impact interpretive dance to free yourself from the blanket cocoon. As you stand, your joints protest, cracking, creaking, and reminding you that your mattress is filled with more straw, dust, and mysterious lumps than actual support. Every movement is a negotiation between wanting to get up and wanting to avoid stepping on someone else's hand. The communal room comes alive in slow, reluctant waves. People shuffle about, tripping over boots, grumbling about the weather, and forming an orderly queue for the single tin basin in the corner that serves as both sink and mirror. You splash your face with water that's slightly colder than your optimism and at least as clean as yesterday's dishwater. There's a single bar of soap, communal property, which has shrunk to a size that's best described as inspirational. You look around and take in your fellow boarders, bricklayers, seamstresses, errant chimney sweeps, and the odd apprentice who claims he'll one day own the whole building. No one believes him. The conversation is a blend of complaints, hacking coughs, and the daily ritual of searching your clothing for new holes and inventive stains. Personal space is a myth here. If you can turn around without elbowing 2 people and a stray cat, you're probably late for work. Breakfast is a democratic affair. Yesterday's bread, slightly rehydrated with tea if you're lucky, and a smear of whatever condiment survived the week. You break your fast with a hunk of bread that doubles as both nutrition and a dental challenge, chewing slowly so your jaw has time to prepare for the shift ahead. Someone passes around a tin mug of tea that's more hint of tea than actual beverage. Its warmth a temporary distraction from the biting cold. As you pull on your only shirt, stiff with last week's wash and this week's hopes, you hear the muffled sound of factory bells echoing down the street. It's your cue to leave, but not before a quick mental checklist. Boots? Check. Hat? Maybe. Sanity? Debatable. You step carefully over snoring bodies, dodge a suspicious puddle near the door, and squeeze out into the hallway where the adventure continues. The hallway is a cacophony of shouting landladies, barking dogs, and someone already complaining about the price of coal. You shuffle down creaky stairs, each one threatening to collapse under the weight of collective exhaustion. By the time you reach the front door, you've already dodged 3 arguments, a flying shoe, and a rumor about a new bakery opening on the corner. Outside, the city is waking up, which means you're already behind. But as you join the parade of bleary-eyed workers tramping into the morning fog, you realize you've survived another night. And in Victorian London, that's about as close to luxury as it gets. No snooze buttons here. The factory bell rings at 5 a.m. sharp, and it's so loud it could probably be heard in the next century. Oversleep, and you'll get docked a day's pay. Or if you're unlucky, a swift kick from the foreman, who has all the empathy of a particularly grumpy gargoyle. Time is not your friend in Victorian London. The day is ruled not by sunlight or good intentions, but by the relentless tyranny of clocks. Clocks owned by your employer, always set a little fast, as if to squeeze just one more half hour of productivity out of you before breakfast. Your own sense of time is irrelevant. Factory time is the only time that counts, and it's enforced by bells, whistles, and a complicated system of shame. You stumble out of bed at the first clang, heart pounding, brain foggy. There is no such thing as 5 more minutes unless you want to spend them listening to your supervisor recite the entire disciplinary handbook. Volume 1. Being late and why that's a personal failing. The neighbors upstairs have already started clomping down the stairs, boots echoing like distant artillery fire. Someone in the next room is frantically buttoning a shirt, muttering curses at a waistcoat that shrank during last week's rainstorm. The walk to work is a race against the clock, and against hundreds of equally desperate souls. The city pulses with energy as workers flood the streets, clutching lunch pails and hope in equal measure. The air is thick with steam, fog, and the anxious scent of punctuality. You keep an eye on every church spire and public clock you pass, convinced that each one is mocking you with a slightly different time. It's a city-wide conspiracy. Every clock runs fast except your own. The closer you get to the factory gates, the more frantic the pace. There's always that one guy who swears by his pocket watch, strutting casually while everyone else sprints. No one knows how he does it, but rumors say he hasn't washed since Queen Victoria's coronation and only eats pickled eggs. You, on the other hand, are in the final stretch, boots pounding the pavement as the bell rings its final cruel warning. At the gates, a crowd surges forward. The foreman stands watch, clipboard in hand, expression carved from granite. If you make it before the bell stops ringing, you're safe. If not, you face the gauntlet, a public scolding, a deduction from your already miserable wages, and possibly a new nickname, Sleepy, Straggler, or, for repeat offenders, Unemployed. Inside the factory, time splits into a new, more punishing form. There's the shift bell, the break bell. The bell that signals you're allowed to briefly stop inhaling lint and start eating yesterday's bread. There's the lunch bell, but don't get your hopes up, it's just a shorter work session with slightly more crumbs. Then there's the most important bell of all, the end of shift bell, also known as the sound of salvation, which always seems to ring at least half an hour later than advertised. Victorian timekeeping is a sensory experience. You don't just hear the bell. You feel it vibrating in your teeth, see it in the frantic movements of the overseer's moustache, and taste it in the metallic tang of fear. Every clock is a silent overseer, watching, judging, and waiting to catch you off guard. Try comparing this to your modern alarm clock, which gently buzzes or plays your favorite playlist. Here, the only playlist is a symphony of clanging metal, shouts, and the soft weeping of grown men who just wanted 10 more minutes of sleep. There's no snooze button, just a brief fantasy that one day someone will invent one, and you'll get to use it in another, kinder universe. By the time you're actually at your station, your day has already felt like a marathon. You've outrun time, dodged authority, and participated in what amounts to a daily Olympic sprint with nothing but a crust of bread and sheer panic in your stomach. Your reward? You get to watch the clock all day, knowing that each second brings you closer to another bell, another sprint, and another reminder that, in Victorian England, time doesn't just fly, it chases you down, catches you, and makes you pay for every minute. You shuffle out onto cobblestone roads shrouded in London fog and the distinct aroma of horse, let's say, leftovers. Every step is a gamble. Is that puddle water or something else entirely? The only thing colder than the morning air is your employer's heart. Your boots, if you're lucky enough to have them, squish through a mysterious substance that is part mud, part manure, and part existential dread. Victorian London doesn't do mornings gently. The streets are a waking beehive of activity, with carriages rattling by, hawkers already yelling about day-old bread, and chimney sweeps hustling their way to another sooty appointment. Everything is coated in a layer of soot, including you, and you haven't even made it to the factory gates yet. The city itself is barely visible, swallowed by a fog so thick it could hide entire neighborhoods, or at least your sense of direction. Gas lamps flicker bravely, casting pools of orange light that illuminate exactly nothing. You squint at passing shapes, hoping it's a friendly neighbor and not just a goat on the loose again. The only thing more unpredictable than the weather is who, or what, you'll bump into before sunrise. Street sounds are a medley of clopping hooves, vendors' shouts, and the ceaseless cough of the coal-choked masses. The omnipresent clatter of wheels on cobbles provides the percussion, punctuated occasionally by the distant shriek of a factory whistle. A gentle reminder that you're already late. Every turn is an obstacle course. Dodge the fishmonger's cart, sidestep the puddle that almost certainly isn't just rainwater, and try not to inhale too deeply when passing the tannery. A sudden commotion ahead, a group of newsboys jostling for a prime selling spot, their shouts blending with the shrill cries of Morning Post and Who'll Buy My Papers. You sidestep one, narrowly avoiding an impromptu rugby tackle, and immediately step into something warm and suspiciously sticky, a small price to pay for a Victorian commute. Every so often, a more prosperous figure sweeps by in a hackney carriage, curtains drawn, utterly insulated from the smell and chaos. You try not to take it personally, but it's hard not to notice that their horses look better fed than half the workers on the street. You, on the other hand, tighten your scarf, shiver into your coat, and accept your fate as a member of London's great, grimy pedestrian army. Crossing the street is a feat of both athleticism and optimism. Omnibuses hurtle by, driven by men with the look of someone who's seen things, mostly accidents. You time your dash perfectly, weaving between horses and carts, only to find yourself on a section of pavement slick with mysterious Victorian goo. You keep moving, fueled by adrenaline and the vague hope that maybe, just maybe, today the bakery will have a broken loaf cheap enough for breakfast. People pass by in every state of wakefulness. Mothers hurrying with babies tied in shawls, boys carrying bundles of kindling, and the occasional labourer already asleep on his feet, hat tipped down to block out the worst of the morning drizzle. A gentle rain begins to fall, instantly mixing with the street's natural resources to create a scent that is unmistakably London. Odour horse, coal smoke, and ancient boot leather. You pull your coat tighter, aware that this is as warm as you'll be all day. A distant clock chimes the hour. You increase your pace, dodging a group of dock workers who look only slightly more awake than you. The river is somewhere nearby, invisible in the mist, but you can smell the brine and hear the lowing of cattle headed to market. As the factory gates come into view, tall, iron, and as welcoming as a tax auditor, you're hit by one last gust of wind. It slices through your layers and straight into your bones. A final reminder that comfort is for other people, possibly in other centuries. You join the queue at the gates, stamping your feet and breathing clouds into the fog, ready to begin another day as a tiny, determined cog in the ever-churning machine of Victorian progress. But hey, at least you didn't slip on the cabbage leaf this morning. That's practically a win. You're 9 years old, 4 feet tall, and already working your third job. Welcome to childhood Victorian style. You squeeze into spaces adults can't reach and try not to sneeze, because you might dislodge the asbestos holding the building together. Forget playtime, forget school, unless you count learning how to dodge a swinging loom, and forget ever seeing a toy that isn't homemade out of leftover thread and wishful thinking. Childhood in the Victorian era is less about innocence and more about acquiring a rich tapestry of minor injuries before you hit puberty. If you're lucky, you've still got all 10 fingers. If not, well, at least your gloves fit better now. Your day starts before sunrise. While the neighbor's rooster is still considering whether to bother crowing, you're already halfway down the street, racing the factory bell. Breakfast? Maybe a crust of bread or, if it's a special day, a lick of jam from your own finger. You hustle through the fog with a knot of other child workers, some as young as 5, all of you blinking through the gloom and sharing last night's gossip. Who got caught napping, who got promoted to thread fetcher, and whose shoes are held together entirely by string and hope. Inside the mill, your job is simple, at least according to the grown-ups who don't have to do it. You wriggle under machinery, untangle stuck threads, sweep up endless piles of fluff, and crawl into the darkest corners to retrieve parts dropped by adults who are too large or too fond of their limbs to go after them themselves. You're the factory's designated go-between, scavenger, and, on occasion, canary in the coal mine, though that last one is less metaphorical than you'd like. Supervisors stalk the aisles with all the warmth and understanding of a tax collector at Christmas. If you work quickly, you might avoid their attention, which is good, because their encouragement usually comes in the form of a barked insult or a rap on the knuckles with a stick. Victorian management, motivational as a bucket of cold porridge. You learn early to keep your head down, move fast, and never, ever let them catch you yawning. Break time is a loose concept. Sometimes it's an official 5 minutes, sometimes it's just a pause while the machines are fixed, and sometimes it's just an adult forgetting you exist behind the flywheel. You sit with your friends on a pile of sacks, legs dangling, eating whatever scraps you can scrounge from home. Someone might have half an apple or a crumbly bit of cheese, and you pass it around, inventing games with pebbles and pieces of string. The fun stops abruptly when the foreman shouts, and you scramble back to your stations, pockets full of dust and dreams. Child labor isn't just in the factories. You might find yourself as a chimney sweep, climbing through soot-choked flues barely wider than your shoulders, scraping your knees raw on the bricks and trying not to think about the stories of boys who got stuck and never came out. Or maybe you're a mudlark, picking through the banks of the Thames for anything worth a penny, buttons, bones, even old nails, while keeping an eye out for rats the size of cats and adults with sticky fingers. Every job has its hazards. Spinning machines with hungry gears, boilers that hiss and spit scalding steam, piles of raw wool that trigger sneezing fits so violent you worry you'll bring down the building. Nobody's handing out hard hats, and the only safety briefing you get is don't bleed on the product. But at least you're earning a wage, which is more than some, even if most of it disappears straight into the family rent jar before you can blink. By the end of the day, your arms ache, your back feels 80 years old, and your face is smudged with enough grime to qualify as camouflage. But you've made it. Another shift survived, another penny in the pocket, and another step closer to growing up fast. You stagger home in a knot of exhausted, giggling children, dodging horse carts and puddles, knowing that tomorrow you'll do it all again. Because in Victorian London, childhood is short, work days are long, and the only thing smaller than your hands is your chance of sleeping in. You enter the spinning mill, a cathedral of endless noise, clattering looms, and machinery with more exposed gears than your nightmares. Safety regulations haven't been invented yet, so your main PPE is run faster than the machine. The air inside is a living, breathing thing, dense with floating lint and heavy with the musk of oil, sweat, and whatever's been festering under the floorboards since 1842. The sun barely penetrates the high, grimy windows. Instead, you work under flickering gas lamps, which are just bright enough to illuminate all the sharp edges you hope to avoid. Every surface is slick with a mysterious combination of grease, dust, and someone's hopes for a safer tomorrow. The noise is relentless. Looms bang and shudder like caffeinated thunder. Metal clatters and belts slap, a percussive symphony played at a tempo only a Victorian manager could love. Conversation isn't just difficult, it's practically illegal, unless you enjoy shouting directly into someone's ear and repeating yourself until you lose the will to live. You quickly learn to communicate with shrugs, eyebrow acrobatics, and the universal language of duck, that thing's coming loose. Your shift is a blur of repetitive motions and high-stakes multitasking. Your main job: keep the spinning frames loaded, untangle threads before they snarl into expensive chaos, and fetch anything your supervisor demands at a moment's notice. The frames are hungry, always devouring cotton at an alarming rate, and occasionally a finger or two. You work quickly, hands darting in and out, constantly watching for the flash of a loose shuttle or the deadly clack of a misaligned gear. The most important skill? Knowing when to yank your hand away before the machinery gets curious. If something jams or snaps, congratulations, you're now a mechanic whether you know it or not. The foreman yells, you panic, and a team of exhausted workers swarms the machine like a Victorian pit crew. Tools appear from nowhere. Someone swears inventively. You just try not to get blamed for the whole thing. At least once a week, the machine gods demand a blood sacrifice. Usually a pinched finger, a bruised arm, or, on a memorable day, the complete disappearance of someone's lunch into the gears. Lunch is gone, but the mill presses on. Heat is another silent tormentor. By midday, the temperature soars. Sweat beads on your forehead, and soon you're just another glistening cog in the human machinery. If you dare open a window for fresh air, a manager will materialize to remind you that proper ventilation causes drafts, which cause sickness, which costs money. So you breathe deep and pretend you love the taste of humid lint. Of course, you're not alone in this mechanical ballet. Workers of every shape and size crowd the floor. Child laborers scurry underfoot, nimble enough to retrieve fallen bobbins from beneath moving parts, if they're quick. Old hands move methodically, every scar on their fingers a story about the one time they underestimated the speed of a flywheel. The lucky ones have a routine. The rest? They just try to keep up and hope nothing explodes. There's a brief break, if you can call it that, when the foreman disappears for his important business rumored to be a nap in the storeroom. You catch your breath, swipe a mouthful of bread, and compare bruises with the spinner at the next station. There's always a whispered rumor about a new law to shorten shifts or install safety guards. But for now, you settle for the comfort of not having lost anything irreplaceable before lunch. As the day drags on, you become one with the mill. Part flesh, part dust, all endurance. The only way to track time is by the gradual accumulation of lint in your hair and the slow decline of your morale. Every task blends into the next, a monotonous waltz performed to the tempo of relentless machinery. You dream of silence, not quiet, just the absence of banging, clanging, and the occasional shriek when a belt slips loose. When the end of shift bell finally rings, You feel it in your bones. You stagger away, ears ringing, limbs heavy, lungs still tasting the mill's peculiar blend of damp cotton and ambition. But you survived another day in the spinning mill, more or less in one piece, and in Victorian England, that's called a win. Lunch is just a rumour. You work until your hands blur, pausing only when a supervisor yells or when your sleeve gets sucked into the machinery. Whichever comes first. The only thing longer than your shift is your existential crisis. In the grand tradition of Victorian management, the day is less about productivity and more about testing how much physical and psychological punishment a human can take before turning into a cautionary tale. The official workday is 14 hours, but in reality, time is a slippery concept. The only thing you can count on is that you'll finish when the overseer's shadow finally leaves the wall, and not a moment sooner. Your shift starts in the dim pre-dawn light, muscles already aching from yesterday's efforts. There is no coffee break, just the first jolt of adrenaline when the whistle blows and the machines thunder to life, reminding you that you're now on their schedule, not yours. Your job is a symphony of repetitive tasks. Pull the lever, feed the frame, catch the bobbin, reset, repeat. Each movement blends into the next until you're operating on muscle memory, your brain mercifully checking out to daydream about slightly less terrible jobs. Maybe you'd enjoy being a lamplighter. At least then you'd be outside and only mildly flammable. Hours slide by in a haze of whirring gears, flying lint, and the constant chorus of coughs from co-workers who, statistically speaking, are at least 40% dust. If you're lucky, you'll be assigned a spot near a window. If not, you spend the day in the bowels of the factory, where sunlight is a myth and the only fresh air comes from someone opening a door on the wrong side of the building. Time moves strangely here, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, always just out of reach. There's talk of a lunch break, but it's really more of a tactical withdrawal. At some arbitrary moment, a bell rings and everyone bolts for the door, snatching up hunks of bread, bruised apples, or, if they're truly blessed, a wedge of dubious cheese. You eat standing up, leaning against a wall, chatting in low voices so the supervisor doesn't catch you loitering. It's the only time in the day when you feel remotely human. And even then, only for 5 minutes. Blink, and the break's over. Back to work. As the hours stack up, so do the little injuries. A scrape here, a splinter there, and at least one fresh bruise from bumping into machinery that clearly has a grudge. Bandages are rare. Most people just wrap a bit of cloth around the wound and hope their immune system is in a charitable mood. Supervisors stride through the rows with the authority of minor royalty, barking orders and making notes on clipboards that might as well be used for drawing rude cartoons. You suspect half the rules are made up on the spot, and the rest are designed purely for the supervisor's amusement. Mid-afternoon arrives, and you hit the point where you're no longer certain if you're awake or starring in an elaborate fever dream about textile production. Blinking is dangerous. It feels like closing your eyes for too long might lead to accidentally napping, and napping leads to the kind of public shaming that Victorian society really excels at. If you dare to yawn, do it discreetly, or risk a lecture about workplace morale and the dignity of honest labor. You measure the final hours by the increasing creak in your spine and the growing chorus of stomachs rumbling in unison. Every once in a while, someone glances at the clock, only to realize that time is a flat circle and you still have an eternity left. The day ends only when the machines finally grind to a halt, the overseer is satisfied, or when your body simply gives up and you merge with the factory floor, whichever comes first. And then, as you trudge home, you realize you get to do it all again tomorrow. In Victorian England, a 14-hour shift isn't a sign of overwork. It's just another Tuesday. Congratulations, it's time for your meal. A crust of bread, a questionable slice of meat, and tea strong enough to dissolve your spoon. The factory canteen is less a place to eat, more a holding pen for the underfed. You line up in a queue that moves at the speed of molasses in January. clutching a tin plate that has seen more lunches than you've had birthdays. The walls are stained with generations of steam, sweat, and the occasional airborne potato. As you shuffle forward, the canteen lady, her hairnet almost as intimidating as her glare, plops a slab of something brown onto your plate. It might be beef. It might be mystery. No one asks, because curiosity is strictly reserved for people with better options. The bread is hard enough to qualify as a weapon in most European countries. You bang it against the table, just to check if it's developed a new level of resilience since yesterday. The answer, inevitably, is yes. It takes both hands and the strategic use of your one remaining molar to gnaw off a corner. The trick is to soak it in tea, tea being a loose term for a liquid that tastes like someone boiled a bicycle tire with a single leaf from last autumn. If you're lucky, it's warm. If you're unlucky, it's mostly just gritty. Around you, the canteen is alive with the low hum of exhausted conversation. Factory workers trade stories and rumors as they work their jaws. Someone claims to have seen a real sausage once. Someone else says he's got a cousin who works for a baker. And maybe, just maybe, there'll be day-old rolls on Friday, if the rats don't get there first. These are the kinds of stories that keep hope alive, or at least awake enough to keep chewing. You spot the communal butter dish, a battered tin holding a substance that may or may not have started life as dairy. It's passed from hand to hand like a secret, each person scraping off a translucent smudge and spreading it across their bread. By the time it gets to you, it's mostly wishful thinking and crumbs. Still, you go through the motions, because routine is half the battle in surviving Victorian cuisine. If you're feeling flush, maybe you brought something extra from home, a turnip, a wrinkled apple, or last night's cold potatoes. You guard these treasures with the vigilance of a banker in a world made entirely of pickpockets. Once, someone tried to trade a boiled egg for a week's worth of socks. No one ever found out who got the better deal. Despite the grim surroundings, lunch break is the one part of the day where time feels almost generous. For 10 fleeting minutes, you're not just a cog in the machine. You're part of a crowd united by the mutual struggle against indigestible carbohydrates. There's laughter, dry, sometimes bitter, but real. There are complaints about the weather, the boss, the quality of the bread, and the state of modern society. The jokes are old, but so is everything else. But the break doesn't last. The factory bell will ring, loud enough to startle birds 3 blocks away, and everyone will rise in a practiced shuffle. Plates are stacked, crumbs brushed away, and the dregs of tea slurped down in a single, desperate gulp. Someone makes a toast with a crust. To another day of survival and to teeth that are still holding on, it's equal parts humor and prayer. You head back to the factory floor, your belly not exactly full but no longer staging an outright rebellion. Lunch may not offer much in the way of nutrition or variety, but it does offer something else. 10 minutes of camaraderie and the fleeting, almost dangerous, sense that you might just get through the rest of the day. In Victorian England, that's more than enough. Today's side hustle, chimney sweeping. You're either a small child or very unfortunate adult. The pay is bad, the soot is worse, and the boss is only marginally less terrifying than the chimneys themselves. Cough up a lung, collect your tuppence. If you're a sweep, you wake up each morning to the sound of coughing that rivals a tuberculosis ward. The day begins with a generous helping of dread, a cold bucket of water, and a pep talk that goes something like, "Don't get stuck." Again, you wear your oldest shirt because it'll never be clean again, and a cap, which is less for style and more for holding in the black powder that will soon be falling into your hair like grimy Victorian dandruff. The chimneys themselves are like something out of a horror story, only narrower and somehow dirtier. Some are barely wide enough for a child to squeeze through, which is why the job is, let's be honest, almost exclusively forced upon the smallest, skinniest, and least litigious members of society. If you're under 10 and underfed, congratulations. You're perfectly qualified for a profession that is essentially human bottle brush. You begin by wriggling into the dark maw of the chimney. Toes first, armed with nothing but a stiff brush, a bag, and the kind of optimism only possible when you haven't yet learned about gravity. It's pitch black inside, with just enough daylight leaking in from above to remind you how far you have to go. As you climb, soot showers down in thick, choking clouds, instantly coating your mouth, nose, and every exposed inch of skin. You try not to think about what else is up here: dead birds, forgotten nests, and the occasional prize, usually a button, sometimes an actual coin, always a handful of extremely judgmental spiders. If you sneeze, the soot billows around you, making you disappear like a Victorian magician with a coal allergy. Breathing is optional, apparently, and you cough so often that you start naming your coughs. That's a Tuesday cough. That one's the should-have-ducked cough. Your lungs develop their own schedule and communicate mostly in Morse code. Your only protection is a thin scarf and a willingness to forget the existence of future you. Progress is slow, but the boss at the bottom is anything but patient. He shouts up encouragement like, "Move it, or I'll light a fire under you," and sometimes means it. The stories about sweeps being coaxed along by the gentle persuasion of rising heat aren't entirely urban legend. You climb faster, knees scraping against brick, hands gripping for any purchase. By the time you reach the top, you look like you've aged a decade and become an honorary member of the soot family. Emerging into the daylight is an experience somewhere between rebirth and a bad practical joke. You blink, spit out soot, and realize that the entire street is now staring at a child-sized ghost. The boss grins, flicks a copper into your palm, and sends you off to the next house. You might get a half hour to eat, usually bread and cold tea, which now tastes exclusively like burnt toast. Some sweeps work several chimneys before noon, their bodies growing lean and tough but rarely clean. Bathing is an extravagance, so most sweeps simply accept a permanent coating of grime and hope it acts as an armor against future filth. The lucky ones live long enough to develop chimney sweep's cancer, a horrifyingly real disease caused by years of skin exposure to soot. Others just end up with a persistent cough and a lifelong aversion to fireplaces. At the end of the day, you drag yourself home, shoes filled with black dust, ears ringing with the echo of the boss's shouts. You try to scrub off the soot, but it clings like bad memories. You're exhausted, hungry, and somehow both lighter and heavier than when you started. But hey, you survived another day as a human pipe cleaner, collected your tuppence, and earned a story that'll make future generations wince over their safe, modern heating. And in Victorian England, that's practically an achievement. You join the ranks of the Matchstick girls, making matches with hands stained yellow by deadly phosphorus. Side effects may include jaw rot, mysterious rashes, and being grossly underpaid. Dental plans are just wishful thinking. Your day begins before dawn in a crowded tenement room, rubbing sleep from your eyes and trying not to cough too hard, lest you attract the attention of your landlady, who is very keen on rent and only vaguely aware that children need sleep. You scarf down a crust of bread, tie a scarf over your hair, and hustle into the damp streets toward the match factory, where the scent of sulfur announces your arrival long before you get there. Inside, the air is thick with chemical fumes that sting your eyes and coat your tongue in a metallic tang. The room buzzes with the quick chatter of girls and the steady clatter of matchmaking, tiny splinters of wood dipped in a vat of yellow phosphorus and left to dry in neat rows. Your hands move quickly, guided by practice and necessity, and soon your fingertips take on that telltale yellow tinge. It doesn't wash off, no matter how hard you scrub. The supervisor patrols the tables, making sure no one pockets a match or, heaven forbid, stops working to sneeze. Piecework is the name of the game. The more matches you dip and box, the more pennies you might earn. Of course, might is a strong word. After a week of relentless dipping, boxing, and dodging the supervisor's suspicious gaze, you're lucky if you can afford bread that isn't half mold. Every time you ask for a raise, management looks at you like you've just demanded the crown jewels. But it's not the money that's the real danger here. It's the phosphorus. The older girls warn you about phossy jaw, the dreaded industrial disease that starts as a dull ache in your teeth and ends with bits of your jawbone glowing in the dark. It's as fun as it sounds. If you're especially unlucky, your mouth begins to rot from the inside out, your breath turns sour, and eventually you're politely asked to work somewhere else, like outside. Far, far outside, without pay. Most girls don't dwell on it, though. There's work to be done, and if you stop to worry, you'll never keep up. You swap stories to distract each other. A neighbour's run. In with a foreman, a friend who got out and found work as a maid. A rumour that the Queen herself once lit a match made in this very factory. No one believes it, but hope is a rare and valuable commodity here, second only to clean handkerchiefs. At break time, you crowd by a cracked window, sipping weak tea and eating whatever you can afford, an apple if you're lucky, a potato if you're not. Laughter rings out as someone makes a joke about glowing in the dark, but the humour is as brittle as the matches you box. The break is short, just enough to stretch your back and dream about a world without yellow stains and suspicious rashes. Back on the floor, the rhythm of dipping and boxing continues, each movement as automatic as breathing. You try to keep your fingers dry, but the phosphorus has a way of seeping in, burning small blisters into your skin. Sometimes you go home and see your fingertips glowing faintly in the dark, a secret, ghastly badge of honor among the match girls. The day drags on, interrupted only by the shouts of the supervisor and the hiss of fresh phosphorus poured into the vats. You count your matches, your pennies, and your teeth, silently vowing to keep them all as long as possible. When the whistle blows, you trudge home through the twilight, lungs burning and hands tingling. But you survived another day, kept your jaw and maybe, just maybe, put aside enough for a proper meal on Sunday. In Victorian England, that's what passes for a good day at work. Time to go underground. It's pitch dark, damp, and every sound echoes like the ghost of hope. You spend hours hunched over, chipping coal, praying the roof doesn't collapse and that you remember which way is up by the end of the day. Coal mining in Victorian England isn't just a job. It's an endurance test that begins before the sun rises and ends only when you crawl back into daylight, blinking and coughing up half the pit. Your workday starts at the mouth of the mine, where the only warm thing is your breath swirling in the morning air. You grab a battered lantern, squeeze into your oldest, thickest shirt, and descend into the pit. Boots slipping on wooden planks, slick with mud and yesterday's sweat. Once underground, the world shrinks to a narrow tunnel barely wide enough for a grown man to crawl through. If you're small, lucky you, they send you deeper, where the seams are tight, and the only way to work is to sprawl flat on your stomach. The walls sweat and drip, and your hands turn black within minutes. It's so dark that the flickering lamp barely makes a dent in the gloom, and the only company you have is the steady drip of water and the distant sound of someone else swearing about a broken pick. Breathing is a gamble. The air is thick with coal dust, and every breath feels like inhaling sandpaper. After a few hours, your lungs start to whistle a tune you're pretty sure wasn't there when you woke up. If you're lucky, you only cough. If not, you develop miner's lung, the chronic, hacking soundtrack of a Victorian life spent below ground. Above you, the roof groans and settles. You send up a quick, silent prayer to whoever's listening that today isn't the day gravity decides to make things interesting. The work itself is brutal and simple. Swing your pick, chip out the coal, fill your cart, repeat. Each blow of the pickaxe sends up a cloud of dust, coating your teeth, your hair, and every inch of exposed skin. You don't wear gloves, unless you count the calluses that develop after a few weeks. Sometimes the seams run thin, and you chip for hours to fill a single cart. Other times, the coal comes away in great chunks, and you feel like a champion until the foreman shouts at you to hurry up anyway. Lunch break happens whenever you remember to check the clock, or more likely, when you notice your hands are shaking too much to hold the pick. You squat in a side tunnel, eating bread that now tastes permanently like coal and cheese that's sweated nearly as much as you have. There's no time for a hot meal, and there's definitely no break room. You gulp water from a battered tin flask, pretending you can't taste the iron or whatever else might have dissolved into it on the way down. Then it's back to work, pushing loaded carts along rickety tracks toward the shaft. Sometimes the tracks are so warped you wonder if they were laid down by someone with a personal grudge against geometry. You heave and grunt, muscles burning, ducking every time you pass beneath a low beam or feel a loose stone shift overhead. There are stories, always stories, about cave-ins, about people who went in and never came out, about the unlucky souls who drew the short straw and got sent to check the dangerous new tunnels. By late afternoon, your back is screaming. Your fingers raw and stiff. You count the minutes until the call comes to surface. The journey up is a slow, creaking ride in a lift that looks like it was last inspected by a particularly bored rat. As you emerge, blinking in the daylight, you realize you're somehow lighter than you started, because a good day is just making it out at all. Covered in coal dust, hands aching, but alive. Tomorrow you'll do it again. Because in Victorian England, coal isn't just fueling the world, it's chewing up people, one cart at a time. You're a housemaid for a family with more spoons than you've had hot meals. Your job is to clean everything, all the time, with tools made entirely of suffering. Your boss is Lady Hysteria von Passive Aggression. The day begins before the sun dares show its face. You're up in the pitch-dark kitchen, shivering as you haul coal for the fires. The kitchen range is a monster, greedy, smoky, and prone to going out at the worst possible moment. The only thing colder than the flagstones under your feet is the welcome you get if breakfast isn't ready on time. If you're the lowly scullery maid, congratulations. Your entire existence revolves around a mountain of dishes that never, ever ends. If you're lucky, you might upgrade to actual cutlery. Most days, you're scraping porridge off pots with a rag that might once have been a shirt. Cleaning is your life's work. You dust the parlor, scrub the stairs, polish the silver, sweep the hallway, beat the rugs, and then start over because dust is both immortal and deeply spiteful. There's always something left to polish. A row of brass candlesticks, 100 little china dogs, or the good teapot, which, let's be honest, is used for company only and is mostly just a dust magnet with delusions of grandeur. The master's boots must be polished to a shine you can see your own haggard face in, a useful trick for checking if you still exist. If you pause for breath, Lady Hysteria appears, gliding into the room with the eerie silence of someone who's never had to scrub anything in her life. Her voice is pure sugar and vinegar. "Oh, good, you're dusting. I'd like the curtains washed today, and perhaps all the windows, inside and out, before lunch." Every new request is delivered as if it's the most reasonable thing in the world. Never mind that you're still ankle-deep in last night's dinner plates. Your uniform is starched, itchy, and designed to repel both comfort and dignity. The cap never fits. The apron has a personality of its own. You tie and retie your skirt all day as it tries to escape mid-scrubbing. The only perk is the privilege of eating the leftovers from the family's meal, which may include cold mutton, half a potato, or, on festive days, a spoonful of something that was once a vegetable. Dining with the family? Never. If you're seen, it means you're probably about to be blamed for a missing fork. Don't forget the laundry. You haul heavy baskets through icy corridors, boil linens in massive copper pots, and risk burning off your eyebrows with lye soap that can strip paint off a carriage. Your knuckles are raw, and your back aches from wringing sheets until they're crisp and dry, a standard set by someone who's never wrung a day in her life. On top of this, you must watch for the family dog, who seems to think your ankles are fair game and your skirts are a new kind of chew toy. Free time is a fantasy. Your one break is tea, gulped in the scullery, hunched on a crate, ears straining for the next call from above. Even then, you're interrupted. "Jane, did you polish the banisters?" The answer, of course, is yes. You polished them so hard they're now the slickest hazard in the house. If you're not careful, Lady Hysteria will slide down them herself and blame you for the resulting scandal. At day's end, you collapse into a lumpy attic bed, feet throbbing, hair streaked with ash and flour. The other maids compare blisters and stories, some funny, some just tired. Tomorrow it all begins again. You dream of clean sheets, quiet rooms, and meals eaten while sitting down. In Victorian England, that's what passes for ambition. But hey, at least you don't have to attend dinner with Lady Hysteria. Silver linings, even if you're the one who has to polish them. You thought office work would be cushy. Try copying out 1,000 numbers by hand, on a desk that tilts at a perfect angle for wrist pain. No computers, just ink, blots, and the gentle threat of tuberculosis. Welcome to the exciting world of clerking Victorian style. You start your day in a cramped, grey-walled counting house, staring down a mountainous stack of ledgers that multiply overnight like particularly fertile rabbits. Your uniform is a stiff collar and a waistcoat that's just tight enough to restrict your breathing, but not quite tight enough to be an excuse for going home. Before you even sit down, the office air is thick with the scent of mildew, stale tea, and old ambition. Your first job is to fill your inkwell and check your quill for splinters. If you're lucky, the office boy sharpened it properly. If not, you spend the first 10 minutes making accidental Rorschach blots on a document that was already overdue. Paper is precious, and mistakes aren't tolerated. Every slip-up is a chance to practice your penmanship on a stern letter of apology to Mr. Pinchpenny, the supervisor who believes human error is just a sign of weak character. Your desk is positioned to catch the least possible sunlight and the most possible drafts. Some days, you spend more energy shivering than writing. When you do warm up, it's usually from the adrenaline spike caused by knocking over your ink pot, an office hazard ranking just below accidentally coughing during a meeting. There are no typewriters. Those are still considered suspiciously modern. And every report, receipt, and invoice is painstakingly copied by hand, in triplicate. You don't have a calculator, just your wits, a blunt pencil, and the sort of math anxiety that wakes you up at 3 a.m. Your co-workers are a chorus of coughs and sighs, the soundtrack of a generation suffering through too many hours hunched over paperwork. Mr. Blenkinsop, the head clerk, has a cough that could fell an ox and a glare that makes grown men lose their place in the ledger. You don't dare speak unless spoken to. Every so often, there's an office treat. Someone brings in day-old buns or, on rare holidays, a slightly suspect pie. Mostly, you just exchange nods, and the occasional whispered complaint about the price of coal or the unrelenting march of new-fangled bureaucracy. The real joy of Victorian office life is in the details. The delicate choreography of passing ledgers along crowded desks without dropping them. The daily quest to locate your blotting paper, which someone else has definitely borrowed. The thrill of discovering that the coal stove actually works today, even if it means a sudden, smoky fug that settles in your lungs like a second, unwanted overcoat. Lunch is taken at your desk, hunched over crusts of bread and lukewarm tea, your main hope being that the crumbs don't attract mice. If you're brave enough to venture outside, it's a quick walk to the pie shop, where you get a mystery filling and a view of the bustling, soot-blackened street. You hurry back, nervous about being late and earning a lecture from Mr. Pinchpenny on the virtues of punctuality. The afternoon drags. Your fingers cramp. Your vision blurs. You develop a sixth sense for which ledgers will fall apart when opened, and you learn to calculate sums with one eye closed to reduce the migraine. Any mistake means starting over, and every mistake is an invitation for a performance review that consists mostly of sighs and the phrase, "In my day, as the sun sets, the office dims and your energy with it." The final bell rings, and you put away your pens, stack the ledgers, and slip on your hat. You emerge into the night, blinking and stretching, grateful to trade paper cuts for fresh air, even if that air is flavored with coal smoke. Tomorrow you'll do it again. Because in Victorian England, office work isn't the escape from factory life. It's just a different brand of endurance. At least the risk of losing a finger is slightly lower, unless you're careless with the paper cutter. You're out on the street hawking pies, matches, flowers, or slightly used handkerchiefs. Every sale is a duel with rival vendors, and every customer is one step away from reporting you for loitering. You start your day before the city's even awake, jostling for your favorite patch of pavement. It's not much, just a corner near the market where the wind doesn't cut quite so deep, and the bakery occasionally tosses out yesterday's buns. You clutch your tray of wares, half pride, half inventory, and rehearse your pitch. Maybe you're selling shriveled apples. Or maybe you're touting lavender sprigs to mask the city's more aggressive scents. If you're really desperate, you're selling luck, buttons, bent nails, and whatever else you could rescue from the gutter before the dustman did. The other sellers eye you up and down, measuring your haul against theirs. There's Rosie the pie girl, bellowing about the flakiness of her crust. Old Tom with his paper cones of roasted chestnuts. The match girl, her hands red and raw from the cold. Everyone's got a gimmick, and everyone's volume is set permanently to ear-splitting. To get noticed, you learn the ancient art of Victorian street calling, a melodic, pleading bellow that could wake the dead and possibly summon a few more customers from the graveyard. Customers are a mixed blessing. The housemaid scurrying by might buy a posy for her mistress. If you flatter her hat and don't mention the mud on her hem, the bootblack's mother will swap a handful of coppers for a hunk of questionable pie, so long as you promise it's fresh, or at least fresher than the boots. But not everyone is friendly. Gentlemen sneer, gentlemen's wives avoid eye contact, and the local constable is always convinced you're one complaint away from outright criminality. Rain or shine, you have to keep your energy up. If you slump or look bored, a competitor will elbow you out of your spot and snag the next hungry customer. Sometimes, it's a battle of wit and patience. Rosie claims her pies are twice baked, because the first time, the oven went out. You insist yours are just right. If you like your pies still having a bit of a heartbeat, it's friendly, but only until someone's supper money is at stake. You master the art of reading a crowd. A glance, a shuffle, the telltale look of someone with a spare penny burning a hole in their pocket. You pounce with charm, a dash of cheek, and a practiced smile, just wide enough to distract from the chipped tooth. If you're selling flowers, you invent sentimental stories for each one. If it's matches, you strike one for effect, hoping the flicker distracts from the cold. If it's handkerchiefs, you never admit where they came from, and certainly not that you found them in last night's rain barrel. Lunch is whatever you can barter or sneak from the market. A bruised apple, a heel of bread, or the odd treat traded with another seller. You sit on a curb, legs dangling, counting your coins and wondering if you'll have enough for supper or just enough to keep the landlord from changing the lock again. The highlight of your meal is swapping tall tales with your rivals, who, despite their best efforts to outsell you, are also your closest allies in the ongoing struggle against both hunger and the constabulary. The day drags on, your voice grows hoarse, and your shoes lose another layer of soul. You keep calling, keep smiling, keep hustling, because every penny is a victory, an extra candle for the night, a loaf to share, or maybe, if you're feeling wild, a bit of cheese that isn't more rind than dairy. By sunset, you're spent, your wares nearly gone, and your body as battered as your tray. But you survived another day. You faced down the crowds, the cold, the competition, and the scowl of the local bobby, and you have the pennies to prove it. In Victorian England, street selling isn't just a job. It's a marathon, a performance, and a battle of wills, all for the chance to live and shout again tomorrow. When money's tight, you grab a stick and go mudlarking, digging through the Thames for anything remotely valuable. Highlights include ancient coins, lost buttons, and the occasional aggressive eel. Mudlarking isn't a job so much as a last resort for the stubbornly hopeful and the professionally desperate. At dawn, while respectable Londoners are still snoring under a pile of threadbare blankets, you're already ankle-deep in mud, squinting at the sluggish grey river and hoping today will finally be the day you find something worth more than a hot potato. Your outfit? Yesterday's best, meaning it's slightly less muddy than what you'll be wearing by noon. The Thames is your office, your co-worker, and your chief rival. The riverbank is a cacophony of smells, rotting seaweed, yesterday's fish market, and whatever the tanneries dumped upstream last night. Every step is a gamble. The mud could suck off your boot, or you might step on something sharp, or, if your luck is running particularly Victorian, both at once. You don't ask what's floating by, you just hope it doesn't want to bite. Your main tool is a sturdy stick, battered from years of poking, scraping, and, on special occasions, fending off territorial swans. You scan the shoreline for glimmers, anything that doesn't look like mud or misery. If you're sharp-eyed, you might spot a Georgian coin, a broken pipe stem, or a length of copper wire. Some days you're rewarded with the elusive clay pipe bowl, like hitting the Mudlark lottery. Other days, it's all oyster shells, brick shards, and the skeleton of a boot that gave up before you did. Competition is fierce. The river is crowded with other mudlarks, young and old, men and women, all with the same hunched posture and thousand-yard stare of someone who's spent too much time debating whether that lump is coal or just an especially dark potato. You swap rumours. I heard someone found a gold ring by London Bridge last week. Saw a shilling near the Waterman's Steps. Hopes rise, only to be dashed when you discover your coin is a flattened bottle cap. Every find tells a story. A bent spoon, a crumbling thimble, a child's marble, relics of other, busier days. Sometimes you unearth bones, and you quickly move on, because you really don't want to be late for dinner and have to explain to a constable why you're carrying around half a sheep's femur. If you're lucky enough to find buttons, you trade them for pennies at the rag and bone shop. If you find iron nails or bits of rope, those go straight into the might-be-useful one-day pile back home. The river itself isn't exactly friendly. The tides sneak in without warning, forcing you to scramble for higher ground while the water tries to steal your shoes. You keep a wary eye out for eels, which, despite their reputation, do not want to be friends. You develop a mudlarker's sixth sense for danger, rising water, shifting banks, and the inevitable "Oi, get out of it" from a passing dock worker who thinks you're after his secret stash of bottle stoppers. Lunch is a crust of bread on a rock, staring out across the grey water and sharing tall tales with fellow mudlarks. Someone always claims to have found something valuable, but the details grow fuzzier with every retelling. It was a gold ring, no. A silver watch, no. It sang me a song and danced a little jig. You nod, chew, and watch the tide for your next shot at fortune. At day's end, your haul might fit in your pocket. But it's something. A handful of coins, a new button for your coat, and maybe, just maybe, enough to buy dinner that didn't come from the river. You scrape the worst of the mud from your boots, trudge home, and dream of treasure. Because in Victorian England, one person's trash really is another's lifeline, and tomorrow the river will start the game all over again. Did you enjoy having 10 fingers? So did everyone else, until a spinning frame ate 3 for breakfast. There are more bandages in the factory than in a Victorian surgeon's kit, and that's saying something. In Victorian times, workplace safety is just a fancy term for try not to die today. The factory floor is a living obstacle course of spinning gears, open belts, and iron levers, each one hungry for a piece of you. Forget warning labels or safety briefings. The only official advice is don't get caught. You're more likely to meet a unicorn in the break room than see a first aid kit. Each day, you navigate a labyrinth of moving machinery designed by someone with a grudge against human anatomy. You dodge whirling flywheels, duck under churning drive shafts, and try not to trip over piles of loose cotton, which are both highly flammable and oddly magnetic to shoelaces. If you're a child worker, congratulations, you're even better at crawling under running machines to retrieve a dropped shuttle. Don't move too slowly, or you'll get a helpful nudge from the supervisor, who is convinced children bounce. Loud crashes and sharp yelps are a regular part of the soundtrack. At least once a week, someone gets their sleeve caught, and there's a mad scramble as the foreman sprints over with a knife, hacks them free, and yells at them for bleeding on the good cotton. There's always a story about old Three-Fingered Bill or No-Toes Nancy. Living legends who survived their run-ins with the machinery. Living, that is, if you define living as still coming to work and very good at pointing directions, bandages are everywhere. But they're mostly makeshift. Strips of cloth torn from a shirt. Or, if you're feeling fancy, a spare handkerchief dipped in vinegar. Actual medical attention? Not unless you're ready to wait hours or, more likely, walk it off with a pat on the back and a stern warning not to bleed so loudly. If you really lose something major, like a finger or a chunk of scalp, you'll get a short break, a sympathetic grimace, and a promotion to jobs that don't require counting past 9. Fire is a constant worry. Cotton dust floats through the air like invisible gunpowder, and the only thing more reliable than the daily injuries is the occasional, spectacular blaze. If you hear someone yell, "Fire!" it's not a drill. Everyone grabs a bucket, flings water, and hopes the whole factory doesn't go up faster than your pay packet disappears. The best-case scenario is only losing your eyebrows, not your entire livelihood. Chemical hazards are part of the fun, too. Bleach, dyes, and cleaning acids are handled with the same care as lunch, meaning not much. You learn quickly not to touch your face after handling caustic soda, unless you enjoy looking like you got into a slap fight with an angry lemon. The scent of ammonia lingers on your clothes, and you can spot a dye worker by their permanently blue fingers and creative sneezing fits. Then there's the dust. It's everywhere. On your skin, in your eyes, in your lungs. Every inhale brings a new collection of fine fibers that, over time, add up to a hacking cough and a permanent invitation to the consumption club. Masks? Only in fever dreams. If you ask for something to cover your mouth, the manager will suggest toughening up. At the end of the shift, you count your limbs, compare fresh bruises, and swap war stories. If you're lucky, you make it home with the same number of appendages you started with. You wash the grime off as best you can, check your fingers, still 10, celebrate, and collapse into bed, already dreading tomorrow's dance with disaster. In Victorian England, workplace hazards aren't just an inconvenience. They're a way of life. Every scar is a badge of survival, and every missing finger is a cautionary tale for the next new hire. Safety may be optional, but storytelling is mandatory. Feeling rebellious? Time to join the union? Or, more realistically, watch from the shadows while someone braver gets fired for asking about lunch breaks. Striking is risky, but so is being alive. In Victorian England, just whispering about forming a union is enough to get you the kind of attention you really don't want. From the boss, from the constable, and from that nosy old neighbour who seems to have the world's only functioning memory. The very concept of workers organizing for better hours or safer conditions is met with a reaction somewhere between confusion and outright panic. You want what, exactly? A say in how many fingers you lose per week. Most workers know the drill. Keep your head down. Do as you're told. And never, ever mention the idea of fair wages within earshot of management. The brave, or possibly just sleep-deprived, souls who speak up are regarded with a mix of admiration and terror. You watch from behind your loom as they approach the overseer, voice trembling, to politely suggest that maybe, just maybe, children under 6 shouldn't be in charge of the boiler. The response is usually swift, a stern lecture, a deduction in pay, or, if you're especially unlucky, the dreaded pink slip, which is, ironically, just a piece of paper soaked in tears. Still, word spreads. People start talking quietly during lunch, in the corners of the canteen or behind the stacks of cotton bales. The idea of a union, of workers standing together, demanding rights, or at least the right to eat lunch sitting down, grows. Flyers appear, hastily scrawled and stuffed into pockets, passed around like contraband candy. The supervisors, sensing unrest, suddenly start remembering everyone's names and develop a suspicious interest in your family's health. Then, inevitably, someone calls for a strike. It always starts with hope, a sense that maybe this time things will change. "We'll stand together," someone declares. "They can't fire all of us." Spoiler: they will absolutely try. On strike day, the factory gates are lined with workers, some determined, some just hoping for a morning off, and some nervously scanning for the boss's shadow. You hold your sign high, try to look brave, and hope your shoes don't fall apart before lunch. Management does not take kindly to strikes. Speeches are made, threats issued, and occasionally, the police are called in for that extra touch of Victorian hospitality. You're warned that striking will lead to poverty, ruin, and probably boils. Some bosses get creative, offering loyalty bonuses to anyone who crosses the picket line, a cunning strategy that works about as well as a chocolate teapot. The brave souls who stick it out face long hours, dwindling savings, and the existential dread of knowing the boss is probably eating roast beef for lunch while you chew through your last potato. Victory, if it comes at all, is hard-won and only partial. Maybe you secure a slightly shorter workday, or the boss grudgingly agrees to repair the roof so the rain doesn't come in sideways. More likely, you get a vague promise to look into it, which, in Victorian management terms, means file under never. Still, each tiny gain feels monumental. A little less lint in your lungs, a little more time at home, and the knowledge that someone, somewhere, noticed your existence. Back at work, you return to the routine, but the world is a little different. The seeds of resistance have been planted. You and your fellow workers share a look, a blend of pride, exhaustion, and the unspoken agreement to try again next time, and there will be a next time. Because as long as the mills keep spinning and the bosses keep counting their profits, there will always be someone with enough grit or enough nothing left to lose to stand up and shout, "Enough!" In Victorian England, unions and strikes are the slow, awkward birth of workplace rights. It's messy, it's risky, and it doesn't always work. But it's the start of something bigger than just a lunch break. It's the beginning of change. One stubborn worker at a time. The rulebook is thicker than your lunch. Infractions include talking, blinking too loudly, and not looking miserable enough. Punishments range from public shaming to docking your non-existent wages. Welcome to Victorian factory life, where discipline doesn't mean polite reminders or friendly nudges. It means a relentless parade of rules enforced by overseers who make Victorian schoolmasters look like cheerful life coaches. The walls are plastered with notices: no laughing, no idling, no unauthorized breathing. It's less a workplace and more a boot camp for future pessimists. The overseer is always lurking, part shadow, part rumor, part actual person, He moves silently through the aisles, eyes like a hawk with an Excel spreadsheet. If you so much as whisper to your neighbor, he materializes beside you, ready to deduct a penny from your already tragic wages, or read you a stern passage from the official book of why you were wrong. He's the human embodiment of the phrase not mad, just disappointed. Except he's actually both. Every day starts with a roll call and a reminder of the day's most pressing rules. Yesterday it was no hats indoors. Today it's no glancing out the window wistfully. Tomorrow it might be no using left hands. It scares the machines. You nod solemnly, not because you agree, but because you're saving your arguments for something that might actually get you lunch. Talking is strictly regulated. A quick good morning could cost you a quarter hour's pay if overheard. Smiling is viewed with suspicion. If you're caught whistling while you work, you'll be accused of trying to distract the machinery, which, to be fair, does seem a bit sentient after your 14th hour on the floor. Even blinking too slowly is cause for comment. Are you falling asleep, Jenkins? The machines don't sleep, and neither should you. Minor infractions lead to warnings. Accumulate a few, and you're up for the dreaded public shaming. The overseer reads out your name, your sin, talking during work, laughter, using too much soap in the washroom, and the entire factory gets a chance to look at you with the collective disappointment of 1,000 mothers. If you're really unlucky, you'll be made to wear the dunce cap of industry, a ridiculous hat or sign declaring you the slowest worker on the line. Of course, the most common punishment is the docking of wages. 3p off for talking, 6p for dropping a bobbin. At this rate, you're working for exposure, which, coincidentally, is also what you get when they make you sweep the factory yard in the rain as penance for looking idle. If you manage to go a week without any deductions, it's either a miracle or you've learned to blend into the wallpaper. Some overseers like to get creative. There's the classic stand in the corner, as if you're in the world's most depressing kindergarten, or the infamous extra hour after bell, which is the Victorian equivalent of being stuck in traffic, except the only thing moving is your will to live, slowly inching away. Repeat offenders risk losing their job entirely, or worse, being reassigned to a task so mind-numbingly dull it makes counting lint look exciting. There's a rumor that one factory on the edge of town rewards good behavior with an extra slice of bread and a well done from the manager. You suspect this is urban legend, like the tale of the kind overseer or the machine that never jammed. But hope springs eternal, even in the most disciplined environments. By the end of your shift, you've internalized the rules so thoroughly that you start reciting them in your sleep. You dream of accidentally smiling, of dropping a spindle, of being sent to the overseer's office for thinking about the weekend. Then you wake up, and it's time to do it all again. In Victorian England, factory discipline is less about order and more about survival. The rules are always changing, the punishments are always creative, and the overseer is always watching. If you make it through the day with your dignity and most of your wages, consider yourself a champion. If you accidentally blink too loudly, well, best of luck. Let's open your lunch pail. Yesterday's bread, a hunk of questionable cheese, and if you're lucky, half an apple that's only slightly haunted. Bon appétit. The Victorian lunch pail is less about variety and more about sheer survival. It's a battered tin box, once shiny, now dented and embossed with the mysterious markings of daily life in a chaotic world. The hinges squeak in protest as you crack it open, and the scent inside is a blend of hope, old onions, and memories of better meals. Your bread is never quite fresh. By noon, it's as hard as a brick and just as likely to chip a tooth. If you want it edible, you dunk it in your tea, which, to be fair, is also working hard at being both beverage and paint stripper. There's cheese, too, the kind with more personality than your boss. It's sharp, it's crumbly, and it comes with a side order of blue-green spots. In Victorian England, cheese is both a food and a medical experiment. If it doesn't walk away on its own, it's still good. Apples are rare and precious, so if you have one, even a half, even one with suspicious brown bits, you guard it with your life. You slice off the questionable bits and pretend the rest is crisp, ignoring the whisper of scurvy echoing from somewhere deep in your subconscious. Sometimes, if the stars align and the rats are feeling generous, there's even a bit of cold potato or, on special days, a sausage roll left over from the weekend. This is basically winning the culinary lottery. Some workers bring a turnip or a carrot, unpeeled and stubborn, gnawed at like a rabbit with stress management issues. Vegetables are more for show than flavor. Your neighbor might have a bit of pickled onion, which he shares like he's doling out gold coins. In the canteen, food envy is real. You eye someone's jam tart with a longing usually reserved for romance or bath water hotter than tepid. The real staple, though, is tea. You pour it into a chipped mug, hoping the leaves settle before you drink. The color varies from weak to this could remove paint, but it's hot and it's yours. Sugar is a luxury. Milk is a rumor. Sometimes someone tries to swap a lump of sugar for an extra hunk of bread, but those negotiations get as heated as a parliamentary debate. The pail itself is as important as what's inside it. It's both a lunchbox and a makeshift seat, a pillow on the rare break, and, if times get really tough, a helmet against sudden indoor rainfall. Kids might decorate theirs with chalk, names, or drawings of what they wish was inside. A roast, a pie, a whole chicken. Instead, you have cheese, bread, and the imagination to pretend the cheese is at least from this century. Lunch break is a moment of community. You and your fellow workers gather in the canteen or out in the yard, comparing contents, swapping bits, and sharing news. There's always someone who manages to produce something amazing, a slice of real meat, or even a cake. That person is either secretly rich or has connections with a baker. Either way, you all stare in awe and maybe ask for a crumb. There's laughter too, and stories about better meals, holiday feasts, weddings, that one time someone's uncle brought back oranges from the docks. Most of the time, though, you're happy with what you have. After all, it's more than many get, and you're smart enough to savor every crumb. You finish your meal, brush the crumbs from your lap, and stash the pail under the bench. You know it'll be empty again soon, waiting for the next round of bread, cheese, and wishful thinking. In Victorian England, a good lunch isn't about fullness, it's about making it through the rest of the day. And if you manage to do that without chipping a tooth or summoning the ghost in your apple, you're ahead of the game. If you're young, you might be lucky enough to be an apprentice. That means living with your boss, working for food, and discovering that chores can, in fact, follow you into your dreams. Apprenticeship in Victorian England is billed as the gateway to a respectable trade, a chance to learn the noble arts of cobbling, carpentry, or, if your family's ambitions are sky high, maybe even banking. The reality is less gentle path to mastery and more perpetual indentured servitude with a side of cold porridge. You move into your master's house, which sounds promising until you realize you're sleeping in a cupboard, sharing a lumpy mattress with 2 other apprentices, and a family of mice that's been here longer than the furniture. Your daily routine starts before dawn, with the soft, not-so-soothing boot to the ribs from the senior apprentice. You scramble up and dash to the kitchen, tasked with lighting the fires, fetching water, and feeding the chickens, assuming the chickens don't wake up cranky and try to peck your shoelaces off. All this before you get anywhere near your training, which mostly involves watching your boss demonstrate a task at lightning speed and then demanding you replicate it, blindfolded, upside down, and using only 3 fingers. Breakfast is whatever is left over from your master's table, usually a ladle of thin porridge, unless someone else beats you to the pot. Once fortified, a generous term for what gruel actually does to your morale, you begin your real work. Apprentices do the odd jobs, sweeping the shop, carrying supplies, running errands, and cleaning the tools that everyone else mysteriously manages to keep dirty all the time. If you're learning a trade, you might get to try your hand at stitching a seam, planing a plank, or counting out nails, provided no one is watching, and definitely not when anything expensive is nearby. The boss, meanwhile, is a permanent fixture, half mentor, half tyrant, and entirely convinced that his ability to shout faster is a key to your future success. He'll demonstrate a skill, tying a shoelace, cutting a straight line, balancing the accounts, then glare as you fumble through it like a sleep-deprived octopus. Every mistake earns a sigh, a lecture, or a creative new nickname that's destined to stick for the rest of your apprenticeship. Did you drop the hammer again? Congratulations, you're now fumbles until further notice. Living with your boss means that work never really ends. You could be scrubbing floors at midnight, patching a hole in the roof at dawn, or standing by the hearth ready to leap into action at the jangle of the shop bell. There's no privacy, no free time, and absolutely no such thing as personal space. The boss's children, if there are any, view you as a mix between a sibling and an extremely interactive toy. The boss's spouse will either be your secret ally, sneaking you biscuits when no one's looking, or your greatest critic, inventing new chores at a rate that would impress a Roman emperor. If you survive the day with only mild humiliation and a few extra blisters, you're doing well. Apprentices swap stories at night, whispering about the legendary apprentice who once got Sunday off, or the kid who was allowed to borrow a real tool before his 12th birthday. There's talk of freedom, of graduating, and finally earning a wage. But that day feels as distant as indoor plumbing. You crawl into bed, exhausted, fingers still curled from hours of practice. You might dream of running away to sea, joining the circus, or opening a pie shop. But in the morning, it's back to work. Because in Victorian England, apprenticeship isn't just about learning a trade. It's about surviving the long, winding road to adulthood one bucket of coal at a time. Down on your luck? Welcome to the workhouse, a grand Victorian institution designed to break your spirit, cure your laziness, and provide gruel with a side of despair. Entering the workhouse is like volunteering for a particularly enthusiastic prison with better branding. At the gate, you're stripped of your dignity and most of your belongings. Clothes, issued. Privacy, gone. Hope, please leave it at the door with your boots. Everything about the place is engineered to remind you that you are now part of the most unglamorous club in Britain. Your new home is an echoing hall filled with rows of narrow beds, each covered in a scratchy wool blanket and a thin, questionably stuffed pillow. You're divided by gender, age, and, quite possibly, who snores the loudest. The rules are posted everywhere. No talking after dark, no food outside the dining hall, no fun, ever, under penalty of being assigned to the bad attitude laundry. The workday begins early, really early. Before sunrise, a bell clangs with the enthusiasm of someone who's never needed 8 hours of sleep in their life. You line up, eyes bleary, for roll call. Then it's straight to the washroom, where you're issued a small bar of soap and a stern lecture about personal hygiene. Cold water only, because hot water is for the deserving, and you clearly need to work your way up. Breakfast is served in a cavernous dining hall with all the charm of a potato cellar. The meal? Gruel, sometimes accompanied by the ghost of a bread crust. The taste is what you'd expect from something designed to be as cheap and filling as possible. Oats, water, salt, and a hint of existential crisis. Conversation is discouraged. If you're lucky, you'll sit near the window and get a view of the fog to distract you from the culinary misery. Work assignments are varied and, let's say, character building. Women and children are sent to pick oakum, unraveling old ship ropes with their bare hands until their fingers are raw. Men are given heavy labor, stone breaking, wood chopping, or carrying sacks from one end of the yard to the other, just so someone in management can tick a box. Everyone scrubs something. The work is relentless, and the reward is more work. Supervision is constant. The beadle, a professional scowler with a hat 2 sizes too large, patrols the corridors, always on the lookout for slackers. Fall behind? Lose your temper? Laugh at the wrong time? There's a punishment for that, ranging from missing a meal to solitary confinement in the reflection room. A tiny cell decorated with inspirational quotes like, "Work sets you free," and "No, really, stop slouching." Visits from the outside world are rare and tightly controlled. Letters are read, parcels are searched, and the faintest whiff of smuggled sausage can trigger a full-scale investigation. Escape attempts are legendary, usually involving a laundry basket, a well-timed distraction, and a speed walk that would make Olympic athletes proud. Most people, though, accept their fate, counting the days until they can prove themselves worthy of leaving, or at the very least, get promoted to a job that involves less splashing. At the end of the day, you drag yourself back to your bunk, fingers aching, eyes burning. Lights out is strictly enforced. The final sound you hear before drifting off is the collective sigh of 100 tired souls, each dreaming of soft beds, real food, and a world where hope gets to stay awake. In Victorian England, the workhouse is where the unlucky, the old, and the orphaned gather to wait for a second chance. It's not just a building, it's an institution. A lesson and a cautionary tale all rolled into one. Survival here isn't about thriving, it's about holding on to your spirit, even as everything else is stripped away. And if you make it out with your sense of humor intact, you're richer than most. You're on your own, selling newspapers, shining shoes, and occasionally distracting the constable so your friend can pick a pocket. The only benefits are street smarts and hypothermia. Welcome to the world of the Victorian street urchin. No parents, no money, and definitely no bedtime. Your office is the street. Your desk is the nearest stoop or sewer grate. And your co-workers are a ragtag gang of equally grubby children who all know at least 3 ways to scam a hot potato from the pie man. If there's a Victorian equivalent of freelancing, this is it. Except instead of setting your own rates, you're setting your sights on surviving until tomorrow. Your day starts when the city's still asleep, slipping out from under a threadbare blanket in an alleyway or abandoned stairwell. Breakfast is whatever you can find or barter. A cold crust of bread, half a turnip, or, on lucky mornings, a bruised apple filched from a market cart while the owner's back was turned. You wash your face, sort of, in the nearest horse trough, smooth your hair, and practice your "best please, sir, just a farthing" expression in the reflection of a shop window. Jobs for street urchins are many and varied, as long as you're not picky about dignity. Newspaper seller is a classic, shouting the headlines to anyone who will listen, waving your stack of damp, inky broadsheets, and dodging the bigger, meaner boys who try to steal your patch. Shoe shining is another favorite, provided you can find someone with shoes nice enough to polish and the good sense to check for their wallet afterward. If you're creative, you might cobble together a song or a street performance, hoping that passers-by will toss you a penny, or at least not shoo you off the curb. Competition is fierce. There are dozens of children hawking every imaginable product, from matches to ribbons to guaranteed rat traps. The pie seller eyes you warily, knowing that one of your gang once made off with a whole tray. The fishmonger has trained his cat to patrol the stall. You learn fast. If you can't run, you'd better learn to charm, and if you can't charm, you'd better know the alleys like the back of your soot-stained hand. Sometimes, when pickings are slim, you team up. One kid acts as lookout, another distracts the constable, with varying degrees of success, and a third filches a pie or two before melting away into the crowd. It's not glamorous, and it's definitely not legal. But the law in Victorian London has bigger fish to fry. Usually the rich ones who never buy a paper anyway. Lunch is a loosely defined concept. Maybe someone's mum hands out a hunk of cheese, or you pool your pennies for a steaming potato from the street vendor. More often, you just keep working, powered by adrenaline, ambition, and a diet that's 90% air. If the weather turns, rain, sleet, or that special London fog that soaks through 3 layers of rags, you do what you can to stay dry. Huddle under an awning, squeeze into a doorway, or share body heat with a friendly stray dog. At least the dog doesn't try to steal your lunch. The upside to street life? Freedom. No bosses, no schedules, and no lectures about character building. The downside? Everything else. By sunset, your fingers are numb, your voice hoarse, and your haul barely enough to keep you fed for another day. But there's a camaraderie among the urchins, a secret code, a sense of mischief, and the knowledge that you're all in it together. Come what may. You find a place to sleep, under a cart, in a stairwell, or beside a friendly chimney for warmth. You share stories of the day's near misses, the best scams, and the worst customers. Maybe you dream of being adopted by a kindly old gentleman with a heart of gold and a cupboard full of pies. But you wake up to another dawn of scraping, hustling, and hoping for luck. In Victorian England, street urchins are the original gig workers, resilient, resourceful, and always one clever scheme away from a hot meal. The streets may be cold and unforgiving, but at least they belong to you. For now, your morning commute involves dodging horse-drawn omnibuses, rogue pigs, and at least one inexplicable fire. Cross the street at your own risk and watch out for walking accidents, a common cause of death. Victorian London is not a city designed for the faint of heart. It's more of an obstacle course, set up by someone with a grudge against pedestrians. Your journey from home to work begins with a leap of faith. First over the ankle-deep gutter, then into a street teeming with life forms both domesticated and questionable. You quickly discover that the best way to survive is to walk briskly, stare confidently ahead, and act like you know what you're doing, even if you're fairly certain you just stepped in something alive. The air is thick with smog, and visibility is mostly theoretical. Sometimes, the fog is so dense you can barely see your own hand, let alone the oncoming coach barreling toward you at a speed that can only be described as aggressive for a horse. The omnibus drivers don't stop for anyone, not dogs, not nuns, not the elderly, and definitely not you. If you hear a bell and a thunderous clatter, jump now. The cobblestones are slick with mud, manure, and the mysterious Victorian goo that no one really wants to identify. The bravest souls cross streets at a diagonal, dodging piles of refuse, clumps of straw, and occasionally something that looks suspiciously like a boot, but definitely isn't. Rogue pigs roam freely, rooting in rubbish and occasionally blocking whole intersections for reasons only pigs understand. The geese are even worse, hissing, honking, and defending their territory with a viciousness that would make a professional wrestler proud. Every so often, a carriage driver decides to demonstrate just how closely they can cut a corner. You flatten yourself against the nearest wall, clutching your hat and trying not to inhale the full spectrum of Victorian road odors. If you're extra unlucky, you'll be splashed by a passing coach, dousing you in a cocktail of mud and whatever the horses had for breakfast. Street fires are a recurring feature. Sometimes it's a chimney gone rogue. Sometimes it's a stallholder who got a little too ambitious with the spirit lamp. And sometimes it's just the city, burning off a little excess personality. You quickly learn to step around the smouldering remains of what was probably once a hat stand and definitely still is a hazard. Walking accidents are a common topic in the papers. The city is full of hazards, crumbling curbstones, open cellar doors, and potholes deep enough to hide a small child or a slightly larger sense of optimism. Every block comes with a story. Did you hear about Mr. Featherstone? Vanished into the bakery's coal chute, never seen again. You pay attention to where you step, but even that isn't a guarantee. If you make it to work with all your limbs and only minor scuff marks, you're doing better than average. And don't forget the human element. Street sellers jostle for your attention, waving everything from hot pies to questionable ointments. Children weave between legs, hawking newspapers, or simply looking for the next adventure or loose pocket. There's always a pickpocket or two practicing their trade, slipping through the crowd with more skill than most surgeons. By the time you reach your destination, you're exhausted, windblown, and slightly sooty. Your nerves are shot, your boots are 2 shades darker, and your breakfast apple is long gone, traded for safe passage past a particularly menacing goose. But you made it, and that's something to be proud of. In Victorian England, the commute is less about getting from A to B, and more about surviving the journey with your wits, your wallet, and your dignity, mostly, intact. Tomorrow, you'll do it all again, bracing yourself for another day of dodging, leaping, and praying that at least today the pigs let you pass. You survived another shift. Now you get to enjoy your evening by collapsing into bed, coughing up more soot, and dreaming of a world with weekends. Spoiler: they don't exist yet. In Victorian England, free time is something that happens to other people, people with inheritances, country estates, or perhaps just very, very low standards for what counts as leisure. For the average worker, finishing the day's labor means you're technically off the clock, but the universe has lined up a whole second shift just for you. There's always something else to do, and relaxation is just a rumor that occasionally wafts through the window on a gentle breeze, right after the smell of boiled cabbage. The end of your shift begins with a half-hearted cheer and a line of workers streaming out the factory gates, faces grey with dust and eyes glazed with exhaustion. There's no time card to punch, just a quick head count to make sure no one's gotten lost in the machinery or decided to make a break for France. The sun is setting, but you barely notice, since you haven't seen much natural light all day. Your shoulders ache, your hands are raw, and your feet have started negotiating for new ownership. The walk home isn't exactly rejuvenating. You dodge carriages, puddles, and a crowd of street sellers hawking pies and roasted chestnuts with the relentless optimism of people who clearly don't know what you've just endured. On a good day, you have enough coins left over to treat yourself to a hot potato or, if you're feeling reckless, a slice of eel pie. On a bad day, you make do with a pocket full of crumbs and the faint hope that someone at home remembered to save you a sliver of bread. Once home, if you can call a shared room above a fishmonger home, there's more work waiting. Clothes need mending, boots need patching, and everyone is already arguing over who gets first dibs on the single-tin bath. You take your place in line, rolling up your sleeves and praying the water isn't completely opaque by the time it's your turn. Hygiene, in the Victorian sense, means removing just enough grime to avoid being mistaken for a statue. If you're lucky, you get a half hour to yourself. Just enough time to stare at the ceiling and listen to the symphony of the city. Distant factory bells, the rhythmic thunk of carriage wheels, and the neighbour's baby, who has apparently decided that night is the best time to debut his operatic range. You might try to read a scrap of newspaper, but the light is dim and your eyelids are heavier than your boots after a rainstorm. For families, free time is spent together, huddled around the fire if you have one, sharing stories or just savouring the silence that comes when everyone's too tired to bicker. Children play games that mostly involve buttons, string, and imagination, while parents nurse a mug of weak tea and review the day's expenses. The fire crackles. Someone hums a tune, and for a brief, golden moment, it almost feels like the world has slowed down. But leisure is always borrowed time. Chores are never really finished, and the next shift is never more than a night's sleep away. Evenings slip by quickly, blending into the next morning before you know it. There's no such thing as a weekend, just a slightly shorter Saturday, a longer Sunday church service, and a nagging suspicion that Monday is already waiting for you behind the door. As you climb into bed, pulling your scratchy blanket tight, you count your blessings. A roof overhead, a few coins in your pocket, and all your fingers still attached. It's not much, but it's enough to dream for another day. In Victorian England, the concept of free time is as elusive as the perfect cup of tea. But when you find it, even for a moment, It's a tiny, well-earned victory. Sleep well. Tomorrow, it all begins again. It's payday. You receive your wages in coins so small you can barely see them. Half goes to rent, half to food, and the rest disappears into the void. Treat yourself to a potato if you can afford it. Victorian payday is less time to celebrate and more mathematical endurance event. You queue up with your fellow workers in a drafty hallway. Feet numb and hopes as low as your bank balance. The overseer sits at a battered desk, armed with a small box of coins and a ledger thicker than your coat. Your name is called, and you shuffle forward, heart pounding as if there's any real chance of a surprise bonus. Spoiler: there isn't. You collect your wages, a handful of copper and the occasional shiny silver if you've had an especially back-breaking week. The coins rattle in your palm, cold and slippery, threatening to vanish between your fingers and into the cracks of the factory floor. For a moment, you imagine running off to the coast, starting a new life as a professional potato juggler, or at the very least, someone with socks that match. Reality checks in. You owe money everywhere. First stop: the landlord. Rent comes first. Or else you're spending the night auditioning for the role of London's next chimney ornament. The landlord is waiting, all smiles and no mercy, counting out your coins with the flair of a magician and the heart of a tax auditor. You hand over nearly half your week's pay for the privilege of sleeping in a room with more drafts than floorboards and the ever-present threat of your neighbour's boots through the wall. Next, it's off to the grocer. You count your coins carefully, eyeing the piles of potatoes, onions, and the occasional wilted cabbage. Protein? Only if there's an unexpected windfall. The grocer has seen it all and makes suggestions that sound helpful but mostly steer you toward whatever is on the verge of sprouting legs. You buy bread so tough it could double as home defense and cheese that's aged past the point of self-defense. If you're especially flush, you splurge on an egg, one egg, to be divided like a diplomatic treaty. A quick stop at the coalman for a scuttle of fuel can't afford to freeze, though you're one bad week away from learning what Victorian ice bath really means. Any money left goes into the family fund. A few pennies for laundry soap, maybe a ribbon for the baby, or, if your partner's in a forgiving mood, a half pint at the pub for morale. There are always extras. Boots need mending, a button's gone missing, or the roof's leaking again in 3 new places. The local doctor wants payment for last week's cough syrup, and the candleman knows you can't read in the dark. By the time you're finished, your hard-earned pay has been sliced, diced, and shared out, leaving you staring at the last penny and considering framing it for posterity. If you're very lucky, there's something left for a treat, a potato, a hot meat pie, or a scrap of sweet to share with the kids. You savor these rare luxuries like a royal banquet, and for a few minutes, it feels like all the labor was worth it. You share stories, laughter, and maybe even a second helping, if you can stretch your supper and your imagination. As evening falls, you tuck your remaining coins into a tin under the bed, guarding them as fiercely as a dragon with a particularly unimpressive hoard. You've survived another week, paid your dues, and even found room for a moment of happiness among the budgetary acrobatics. In Victorian England, payday isn't about getting rich, it's about getting by. If you manage to keep a roof over your head, food on the table, and hope alive until next week, you're doing better than most. And if you can still afford a potato on top of that, you might as well be royalty. After a long day, you attempt a bath, which is just splashing your face with water that's already been used 3 times. Deodorant hasn't been invented, so you simply embrace your new fragrance. Ode to hard labor. Hygiene in Victorian England is less a personal choice and more of an elaborate negotiation with your living conditions, available water supply, and sheer willpower. You dream of warm baths, perfumed soaps, and fluffy towels, but reality checks in. You're sharing a cracked basin with everyone else on your floor, and the water is so cold you're fairly certain it's plotting against you. The only bubbles in sight are the ones you make as you try not to shiver audibly. The daily bath is a delicate dance. First, you wait your turn behind the other boarders, who all eye the precious basin as if it might suddenly fill itself with hot water and rose petals. No such luck. By the time your moment arrives, the water is grey and mysterious, holding the secrets of at least 3 previous faces. Still, you splash some on your skin, do your best with a scrap of soap the size of a postage stamp, and hope no one's watching as you attempt to rinse behind your ears. The floor is sticky, the towel is damp, and your dignity is only slightly tarnished. Soap is an occasional luxury. And even when you have it, the results are questionable. The cheapest kind strips not just dirt, but the top 2 layers of skin. If you splurge on something scented, you'll spend the day fending off questions about whether you've taken up with a French woman. The result is that most people simply settle for a quick rinse and a thorough dab of whatever's handy: coal dust, flour, or the ever-popular just ignore it. Hair care is even more of a gamble. Combs are communal, and lice are considered more of an occupational hazard than a social faux pas. Hot water is reserved for the sick, the very old, or anyone willing to bribe the landlady. You get by with cold water, a brisk scrub, and the hope that your hair will dry before tomorrow morning. Otherwise, you risk joining the ranks of the permanently damp, whose distinctive aroma is best described as swamp with hints of cabbage. Clothing is cleaned infrequently, and with an air of resignation. Wash day means hauling everything you own to the backyard, boiling it in a cauldron, and beating it against a stone with the same enthusiasm you use to pay rent. The water is black by the second shirt, and everything shrinks at least a size, except the stains, which seem to multiply with every wash. If you're lucky, your clothes dry before mildew takes hold. If not, you simply redefine clean as less crusty than last week. Deodorant, cologne, and perfumes are for the upper crust. For everyone else, it's onions, labor, and a faint trace of whatever was last cooked in the kitchen. There are a few home remedies: lavender sachets for the truly fancy, lemon rinds for the hopeful, or a strategic dusting of flour in the more ambitious armpits. In summer, the city's collective aroma reaches new heights, by which we mean lows. You learn to appreciate a strong breeze. You finish your evening ritual, towel off with a rag that might once have been a shirt, and consider yourself fresh. You climb into bed, which is only marginally cleaner than you are, and drift off with the reassuring knowledge that everyone else smells exactly the same. The city's fog and coal smoke do their best to cover a multitude of sins. In Victorian England, hygiene isn't just about cleanliness. It's about community, spirit, and a willingness to lower your standards just a little bit every day. You smell like soup, but so does everyone else. And honestly, after everything you've endured, you wear it like a badge of survival. Tomorrow, you'll do it all again. Just maybe not with the same water. It's laundry day, which is a bit optimistic, since you only own one set of clothes, and clean is more of a philosophical concept. Washing means boiling your shirt in a pot, bashing it against a stone, and hoping it dries before mildew moves in. By the end, your only reward is a fresh layer of London fog and the familiar scent of damp wool and disappointment. The first rule of Victorian laundry day: lower your expectations. There's no gleaming white linen here, just stubborn stains, mystery spots, and the battle-scarred remains of last week's misadventures. You wake up early, dragging your bundle of clothes through the chilly dawn to the scullery or shared backyard. All around, you hear the hollow thump of neighbours doing the same, armed with washboards, boiling pots, and the resigned sighs of people who know this is just the beginning. You start by heating water, never enough, and always colder than you want. The copper pot is already blackened with age, and it takes a good half hour to get the water even lukewarm. Soap, when you can afford it, is a mean-spirited little cake that could strip the paint off a carriage. You grate it into the pot, squinting against the fumes and hoping that the lye doesn't burn off your fingerprints. You'd like to think this is all for the greater good of cleanliness. But in reality, it's mostly to get your socks to the point where they're not a public menace. With everything bubbling away, it's time for the real labor. Pounding, scrubbing, and beating. The washboard is a torture device masquerading as progress, shredding your knuckles and removing just enough dirt to reveal new stains you didn't know existed. You bash your shirts against a stone, imagining it's the face of your landlord, or your supervisor, or just Monday in general. Every shirt has a story: ink from a spilled pen, soot from the mill, and a splash of something best left uninvestigated. Once your clothes are as clean as optimism will allow, it's time to rinse them. This means dragging them through another round of freezing water, wringing them out until your wrists ache and your fingers are numb. If you're lucky, a neighbor might let you use their mangle, a heavy, hand-cranked roller that squeezes out enough water to prevent mildew from throwing a house party in your pockets. If not, you do your best, twist by twist, until your shirt is less dripping and more slightly less damp. Drying is an art and a gamble. You hang your clothes over the line, praying the sun will show up, or at least that the rain holds off until you get everything mostly dry. The London fog rolls in, clinging to your laundry like a second skin, ensuring that freshly laundered now means tinged with eau de riverbank. Sometimes you catch a neighbor's jealous glance if your socks are drying a little faster than theirs. It's a quiet victory, but you'll take it. Meanwhile, you eye the inside seams for signs of mildew. No matter how hard you try, the smell of damp wool lingers, a mix of hard work and shattered hope. You know that by the time you put everything back on, you'll be one wrong step away from undoing the morning's work. Laundry day is less a path to cleanliness and more of a Sisyphean quest for slightly less filth. As the day ends, you gather your laundry from the line, fold it as best you can, and marvel at your handiwork. A shirt that's only marginally cleaner, socks that might last another week, and a scarf that smells just faintly of regret. You slip back into your clothes, savouring the brief sensation of almost clean before the city grime comes calling. In Victorian England, laundry day is an exercise in endurance, optimism, and embracing the subtle differences between clean, clean enough, and let's not talk about it. You might never win the battle against dirt, but you'll keep fighting it, one boiled shirt at a time. And who knows, maybe next week the sun will actually come out. Or maybe you'll just invent a new perfume. Damp wool and disappointment. Rumor has it there are new laws banning children from working 12-hour shifts. So naturally, the boss invents hide the child whenever the inspector visits. You cram into a coal bin or crouch under a loom, silently negotiating with the universe not to sneeze and blow your cover. The inspector leaves, the boss winks, and you're back at work like nothing ever happened. Victorian child labour laws are a bit like unicorns. Everyone's heard of them, but most people doubt they exist. Still, the government has recently decided that sending 6-year-olds up chimneys or into spinning frames is a bad look. So once in a blue moon, a stern-faced official will arrive, ready to inspect for compliance. This event is both terrifying and hilarious. Depending on whether you're the one being hidden, the warning always comes a few minutes before the inspector enters. Someone shouts, "Rabbit," or gives 3 sharp knocks on the wall. The older kids grab the youngest by the scruff and hustle them into whichever hiding place is least likely to contain rats, or at least smaller rats. You squeeze into a coal bin, pulling your knees to your chest, or wedge yourself beneath a loom, dust motes swirling as you try to disappear into the shadows. Your heart pounds loud enough to rival the factory machines, and you pray to every saint you've ever heard of not to sneeze, cough, or faint. The bosses put on quite the show. The foreman's suddenly all smiles, escorting the inspector across the squeaky clean aisle they mopped for the first time in years. The youngest-looking adult worker has been promoted, just for the day, to assistant spinner. Someone dusts off the factory's one real safety sign and positions it at a highly visible angle. The inspector, clipboard in hand, peers around with the air of a man deeply suspicious that there are children stashed somewhere close by. He asks questions in a slow, grave voice, as though speaking to a room full of slightly deaf parrots. Meanwhile, you wait. Every second stretches out. Every breath is a potential disaster. A sneeze, a cough, even a giggle could spell the end of your employment, or worse, a trip to the dreaded workhouse. You hear muffled giggles from another bin, and you silently vow revenge later, should you both survive the day. Time passes at the speed of panic, and your legs begin to cramp, but you don't move. You barely breathe. At last, the inspector seems satisfied, or perhaps just defeated by the sheer density of plausible deniability, and makes his way out. He pauses at the door, glancing back with a knowing look that suggests he's well aware of the great Victorian tradition of creative compliance. The boss gives a hearty wave, the workers do their best impressions of happy adults, and as soon as the door shuts, the scramble begins. The hidden children emerge from their cubbyholes, blinking and coughing, hair full of lint and eyes full of relief. You dust yourself off, rejoin your station, and return to work as if you'd just popped out for a moment to contemplate life's larger mysteries. No one mentions the incident out loud. The boss gives a conspiratorial wink or a gruff pat on the head, silently reminding you that your continued employment relies on being both invisible and fast. For all the government's new rules, it's clear the real game is just learning how to disappear at the right moment. By the end of the day, you and your friends recount the close call, trading stories about who hid where, who nearly sneezed, and which inspector looked the most like a nervous owl. For the youngest, it's a terrifying game. For the old hands, it's another notch on the I survived Victorian Labour scoreboard. Maybe next week the inspector will return, or maybe he'll decide the whole thing is above his pay grade. In Victorian England, child labour inspectors mean well, but the factories are always 2 steps ahead. Hiding becomes a skill, a tradition, and a strange kind of team sport. The law may say one thing, but survival, like most things in this era, comes down to who can keep quiet, keep hidden, and keep working. Just don't sneeze. The law says Sunday is a day of rest. The reality? It's church at dawn, then chores, then pretending to rest, while secretly fixing last week's mistakes so you don't get yelled at Monday morning. If you're lucky, there's a stolen moment of sitting in the sun before someone needs help peeling potatoes or rescuing a chicken from the chimney. Sunday in Victorian England is a carefully choreographed ballet of piety, panic, and practical labour. You wake before the sun, blink groggily at the sound of the church bell, and fumble your way into your best or only set of clothes, hoping no one notices the creative patching and the unmistakable scent of last night's stew. The family assembles, lines up in height order, and marches toward church, as if being inspected by the Queen herself. The church is packed, standing room only for the slowest, and if you're short, you spend the service staring at the back of someone's coat or the extraordinary hat of Mrs. Butterworth from down the lane. The sermon is long, the pews are hard, and the only thing keeping you awake is the constant, low-level fear that the vicar will ask you to recite something. You bow your head, whisper the right prayers, and make a mental list of everything you'll have to fix when you get home. Service over, you file out into the yard, exchanging polite nods and fielding small talk about the weather, the potatoes, and whose boots are holding up best. The walk back is more subdued. You're already planning your attack on the laundry pile, the floors, and the mysterious stain on the kitchen ceiling. The younger children are sent off to play, preferably out of sight, while everyone else rolls up their sleeves for another round of restful chores. Chores on a Sunday have a particular flavour. They're supposed to be light, no back-breaking labour, no unnecessary washing or hammering, but in practice, anything that doesn't technically involve swinging a sledgehammer is fair game. You sweep the floors, polish the boots, mend a few socks, and try to coax the fire into life for a half-decent dinner. There's always a window to wash, a shirt to stitch, or a pot that needs scouring until it shines. It's unpaid overtime, cleverly disguised as moral duty and family bonding. Sometimes, the house is visited by unexpected chaos. A chicken escapes from the yard and takes refuge in the chimney, clucking defiantly. Someone drops a plate, or the neighbor's cat decides now is the perfect time to test the structural integrity of your best tablecloth. You jump in, because a true day of rest apparently involves as much leaping, chasing, and rescuing as any weekday at the factory. If you're lucky, and lucky is a relative term, you snatch a few minutes to sit outside, face tilted toward the weak sun, knees hugged to your chest. It's quiet, save for the distant sound of bells and the occasional shout from the neighbor's children. You savor these moments. The way the light softens the world, the scent of baking bread, the warm heaviness in your limbs that says you've worked, but survived. But rest never lasts long. By late afternoon, you're back inside, prepping for Monday, laying out work clothes, patching holes, making sure there's enough bread for breakfast, and reminding your siblings that the last one out of bed is on coal duty. Maybe you practice your sums, polish your boots again, just in case, or sneak an extra spoonful of jam when no one's looking. Evening comes, and the family gathers for a meal, simple but shared. You listen to stories, swap news, and sigh with the bittersweet knowledge that another week is about to begin. There's pride in surviving, even if your only reward is an extra minute by the fire before bed. In Victorian England, Sunday isn't really a day of rest, it's just a brief intermission. But it's a chance to catch your breath, gather your strength, and remind yourself that, even in a world of endless work, there's still room for laughter, sunlight, and a chicken or two up the chimney. So, as the factory whistles fade and the last candle gutters out, you finally peel off your boots, if you're lucky enough to own any, and collapse into your creaky shared bed. Your hands are stained with ink, coal, soap, or something that refuses to be categorized. And your back is sending polite reminders that you, too, are technically an antique. Tonight, as you drift off in the comfort of soft sheets, central heating, and the sweet knowledge that your manager can't legally chase you down the street with a broom, take a moment to appreciate just how far we've come. Maybe whisper a quiet thank you to your Victorian ancestors who endured 16-hour days, mystery lunches, questionable air quality, and work benefits that mostly involved not being squashed by a horse-drawn omnibus. For all its soot, suffering, and spectacular lack of personal boundaries, Victorian working life was also a triumph of stubbornness and hope. People kept showing up. They fought for better conditions, even when better just meant slightly fewer rats in the soup. They laughed, sang, snuck an extra biscuit when they could, and managed to hold on to dreams a little bigger than their lunch pails. So next time you're stuck on hold, grumbling about your inbox, or fantasizing about quitting it all for a life of interpretive dance, remember, history may be uncomfortable, but it's proof that people are stubborn, imaginative, and just a little bit ridiculous. Sleep well tonight, knowing you'll wake up in a world with weekends, sick leave, and bread that probably won't try to eat you first. Good night.